Welcome to Soft Talk. Today, let's talk about the United Nations. What is it exactly? A world body, an organization that does the bidding of what we call the P5, the five permanent representatives, representatives of the United Nations Security Council, that is the United States, the United Kingdom, China, uh, Russia, and France? Or is it something else? The League of Nations 2.0. Let's talk about the United Nations today. In Nepal, it is hogging all the limelight because the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is in Nepal on a 4-day visit. His visit could not have come at a more important juncture in international politics. At present, the Middle East is not at peace with itself and the rest of the world. After the Hamas attack on Gaza Strip and subsequent uh, Israeli action on that strip of land, a densely populated area uh, inhabited by uh, lakhs of people. It's a humanitarian disaster unfolding on that part of the world, even as the world body, the United Nations, looks on. Elsewhere, uh, the Russia-Ukraine war has been raging for quite some time. On that front also, the United Nations has not been able to act as a peacemaker. The United Nations chief comes to Nepal at a time when several hyperpowers have been upping their efforts to make it to the United Nations Security Council in the name of making it more representative and more reflective, more reflective of a changing world order. When countries like our very own neighbor India, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, and several other countries have just started rising and shining and making their presence felt in the international world order. Great to include some of the great nations in that world body in those coveted positions. That's great. But then nations do not become great on the basis of their populations alone, on the basis of the land masses uh, they cover. They become great by uh, abiding by certain principles, abiding by like greater ideals like human rights, democracy, the rule of law, universal fraternity, liberty, and that kind of thing. There are ideals that make nations great or small. It's not only about the population and the land mass they cover to measure greatness. It will be quite contextual to note at this point that small and landlocked countries like Nepal have been sidelined. They feel sidelined by the United Nations. There are apparent realizations that some of the world's influential countries have been hijacking the agendas of what we call landlocked countries that also happen to be most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like glacial retreat, glacial lake outburst, floods, landslides, uh, drought conditions, and whatnot. Nepal is one of those countries that is the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. These impacts, the footprints of what we call the sins of the polluters, are everywhere in Nepal, whether it's the Everest brown haze or the inundation of Nepali territories on the southern plains. Livelihoods have been disrupted because of climate change. Uh, there is this growing internal refugee problem, as well as uh, the refugee crises emanating from geopolitics in the neighborhood. Nepal has been disproportionately shouldering the impact of humanitarian crises as well. The refugee crisis originating in Myanmar, with which Nepal has no direct land border, is one such example. Wherever this humanitarian crises develop in the extended neighborhood, Nepal has to shoulder the brunt of such humanitarian crises. A country that has not been finding it quite easy to provide for its own population of about 3 crore. The last time the United Nations high profile visit occurred in Nepal was in the year 2008, at a crucial juncture in the peace process of Nepal that had been reeling under a decade long Maoist insurgency that killed about 18,000 people and uh, destroyed infrastructure to the tunes of billions of rupees and pushed Nepal's development process decades back. Ban Ki-moon, the then UN Secretary General, had visited Nepal at that time in the year 2008. The question is, what brings the UN chief Antonio Guterres to Nepal at this juncture? Nepal has been struggling to uh, take the peace process to its logical conclusion. It has been trying to expedite the transitional justice process. Um, against this backdrop, Guterres comes to Nepal. There are sustained efforts from the government to bulldoze the transitional justice process, to just unilaterally uh, push forward the transitional justice process without taking the conflict victims into confidence. There are reports that the government has been rooting for a blanket amnesty in heinous crimes as well. The recent days have seen uh, the government effect presidential pardon even in cases of murders and that kind of stuff. So this has the human rights fraternity within the country and the international human rights fraternity concerned. Uh, the United Nations chief has made it clear, though, that the transitional justice process should meet Nepal's transitional justice process should meet international standards. Different scholars, different pundits, if you will, have read this visit in their own ways. There are also concerns that the United Nations, like it did through the United Nations mission in Nepal uh, some years ago, is again trying to intervene in Nepal's peace process to serve the interests of uh, global powers. So they have raised concerns about this visit. That is also an angle that cannot be just ignored. As the United Nations chief is most probably aware, Nepal has been a victim of terrorism. Not all of it is homegrown. There are certain forces aiding and abetting terrorism in Nepal to stabilize this country, this small and beautiful country that has been at peace with itself and the rest of the world. Back in the times of King Birendra's regime, Nepal floated a proposal uh, before the world. It uh, requested the countries all over the world to recognize Nepal as a zone of peace. It is the land of the Buddha, Gautam Buddha, and other uh, lesser Buddhas, what we call, and different sages and rishis and munis. It is a center of meditation. It has been so uh, for like millennia on end. So it was rightful for Nepal to ask the world to declare it as a zone of peace. It was its attempt to keep foreign intervention at bay, to shield Nepal from different kinds of foreign interference as well as neighborly interference. A large number of countries uh, put their stamps on that proposal. They accepted that proposal. They recognized Nepal as a zone of peace. But after the changes of the 1990s, after the political changes of the 1990s, that proposal was a kind of next. Coincidentally, some years after The 1990s political change. Nepal had to grapple with a bloody insurgency that killed, as I told you earlier, around 18,000 people and injured several thousand people. It caused massive devastation, destruction of infrastructure to the tunes of billions of rupees, and pushed Nepal's development process back for decades. Talking about Nepal's agendas, what Nepal should raise, what concerns Nepal should raise during the United Nations Secretary General Guterres visit. Nepal has been one of the largest troop uh, contributors to United Nations peacekeeping missions around the world. Nepal has been consistently asking for the elevation of those soldiers to higher positions because even as a small country, despite being a small country, Nepal has been quite active in peacekeeping missions around the world, whether it be Lebanon, whether it be Sudan, or several other uh, war-torn countries and regions of the world. So it is rightful, it is quite adequate, it is quite just for Nepal to demand higher positions in those peacekeeping missions. And Nepal has been seeking the establishment of uh, this United Nations peacekeeping center in Nepal itself. Uh, Nepal has raised this issue, and I hope the United Nations listens to Nepal's requests and acts positively. Then comes, as I told you earlier, the impact of climate change. Nepal has been disproportionately bearing the brunt of the climate change. It is evident in floods, it is evident in uh, glacial retreat, receding snow lines, and glacial lake outburst floods. It is evident in the displacement, in the internal displacement of lakhs of climate refugees, lakhs of climate change affected people. So Nepal should raise the demand for reparations resulting from this climate change. Nepal has a very negligible carbon footprint, but it has been made to bear the brunt of climate change. So the biggest emitters, the topmost emitters should pay smaller countries, smaller and ill-prepared countries with negligible carbon footprint like Nepal uh, for the losses they had to incur because of their actions. Then comes the peace process. There are concerns in the neighborhood that the United Nations increased involvement in Nepal's peace process will affect them one way or the other. One way or the other, the United Nations will have to just heed those concerns. Uh, to the best of my knowledge, the United Nations is in no position to ignore such concerns. Small and landlocked countries account for a majority of the countries in the world. but their voices, they remain ignored more often than not. Their sovereignty, territorial integrity, national sovereignty is under constant attack. Despite foreign aggression, foreign intervention in their domestic affairs, in their everyday affairs, the United Nations has not been able to stand in favor of these countries. South Asia, in particular, has been like a kind of a black hole where small nations, small states disappear, literally or otherwise. But the United Nations has not been able to stand in the interest of these nations. The United Nations also should think about it and come up with like better ways to safeguard the sovereignties of small and landlocked countries. It should act as a bulwark in the interest of these countries, in the interest of their territorial integrity and national sovereignty, because it is supposed to be, it is a world body, isn't it? And every vote counts, doesn't it? It's not just a tool, a body that does the bidding of mighty nations. Then comes let's talk also about the itinerary of the United Nations chief's Nepal visit before he embarks on a visit to China. This is quite symbolic, by the way. Uh, he will visit the Himalayan region of Nepal, Tangboche, and he will have this mountain flight where he will embark on a mountain flight, and he will get to uh, see the Himalayas in all their majesty. Remember, these Himalayas are the water towers of the world. The world has very few freshwater sources, and the Himalayas are one of them. Billions of people downstream depend on the waters from the Himalayas for their living, for agriculture, for fisheries, and whatnot. So these are the lifelines of a huge population. But the Himalayas are melting. The snow line is receding. That is, as I told you earlier, there are increasing instances of uh, climate change induced disasters, and Nepal have been countries like Nepal have been bearing the brunt of the climate change despite a very small carbon footprint. Nepal does not have massive industries, smoke emitting industries. It does not have big polluters. So it has been trying to be one of the lungs of uh, the world. It has huge forest cover, community run forestry projects that have been a smashing success, and that offer lessons in conservation to the world. Despite this contribution to nature conservation, Nepal has been at the receiving end of climate change. So Nepal should be able to raise this issue before the United Nations at this opportune moment. Also, the UN chief Guterres is visiting Lumbini, the birthplace of Sakyamuni Buddha, and several other lesser Buddhas. It is in that extended area that several uh, Sakyamuni Buddha and several other Buddhas like Krakuchanda and Kashyap Buddha were born. In fact, it is the very place where they meditated and received enlightenment. As per a lore, uh, even Sakyamuni Buddha received enlightenment at the very palace compound where he was born. Legends have it that while meditating under the shade of a jamun tree, this wisdom, this enlightenment he attained, that state of enlightenment under that very shade. At a very young age, he was barely in his 30s at that time. But then he was a prince. Uh, he had this worldly leanings. He got entangled in the world. So, in course of time, for the legends, he forgot that knowledge, that uh, he forgot about that higher plane of consciousness that he had attained. He got entangled in the worldly affairs. Uh, but in course of time, several glimpses like people getting old, people dying, uh, that kind of tragedies just deeply moved him, and one day he left the palace. There was this a raging conflict in his kingdom also. uh, the Sakyas were in conflict with other uh, rulers in the neighborhood. So one day he just got tired of this worldly things, disturbances, and left the palace. He traveled to northern India, and once again, after like journeying around several places, he attained that state of enlightenment in Gaya. Looking back, like it appears that this journey was meant to just spread that light around the world. That's why he probably forgot his that state of enlightenment that he had received, he had attained while meditating under the shade of a jamun tree in Tilorakot, where the Sakya, where the palace where he was born is located. So he traveled to different places and attained that state of enlightenment again in Gaya, and he spread the light around the world. So, this is a fitting tribute. Uh, the United Nations chief's visit to Lumbini, the birthplace of Gautam Buddha and several other Buddhas, and the place of enlightenment of these beings, these kind of these divine beings, is like quite significant, especially at a time the world is not at peace with itself. The world is mired in conflicts, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Russia, Ukraine, and several other parts of the world. So let's hope and pray that the message of peace and tranquility and harmony will spread once again from Nepal to the rest of the world. Let the United Nations chiefs visit to Nepal inspire the world community to root for peace, tranquility, uh, goodwill, and prosperity of the entire humankind and all beings that inhabit this blue planet. Let peace prevail all over the world. With this remark, I wrap up this edition of Soft Talk. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.